Aloha Hawaii, this is Paul Kalainui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. Today is the 29th day of July in the year 2012. If you would like to call and join us on the radio, our telephone number here is 524-1080. By the way, we are produced by the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. The opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of this radio station or of the Hawaiian National Broadcast Corporation. We had been talking about Hawaiian self-determination, and I believe that is it today that there will be a gathering at Thomas Square, or will it be at Iolani Palace in observation of Kala Ho'i Ea, the returning of the Sovereignty Day that occurred back in 1843 after a period of time when the British had come to Hawaii, and I forget the name of that British sea captain on this ship known as a Carrisford. I used to remember all of these names. I haven't thought of his name more recently and therefore can't recall it immediately. Anyway, they lowered the Hawaiian flag and raised the British flag and said that Hawaii was now part of Great Britain. Admiral Thomas of the British Admiralty sailed from South America, came to Hawaii after hearing or getting word about what had happened in Hawaii, and investigated the situation, communicated back to Britain, and then restored the life of the Hawaiian nation back to King Kauikeaoli, King Kamehameha III. And Britain had adopted a foreign policy, at least with regards to Hawaii, that it was not to interfere with its sovereignty, and so under instructions, Admiral Thomas returned the life of the land back to the Hawaiian people. That day became a day of celebration, of course, and every year after that, it had been celebrated as the Restoration Day, or in the Hawaiian language, Kala, meaning the day. Ho'i is to return. Ea is the sovereignty, so it's Kala Ho'i Ea. And so today we continue to respond to the Restoration Day. I believe it was actually the 31st in 1843, the 31st of July 1843. And so a number of people attend these gatherings at Iolani Palace, or at the original site at Thomas Square, although it wasn't named after Admiral Thomas until after that. Then that place, which was, I believe it was known as Aina Hau, and I may be mistaken. So anyway, that's the history of that day. Now, Liliuokalani was a very young child at the time these events occurred, but throughout her life, that day was celebrated, and the recognition of the non-interference by other governments into the Hawaiian nation. And this was part of the subsequent activities taken by King Kauikeaoli, or King Kamehameha III, to create a motif of international relations with the various countries, going out and establishing diplomatic and consular posts, so that by 1887, especially during the heyday of King David Kalakaua, we had 99 diplomatic and consular posts throughout the world, and treaties and executive agreements with the major nations of the world. With the United States, we had at least 5 treaties. A treaty of 1850, I believe, said that there would be perpetual peace and amity between our countries. And these are treaties that had been approved by the U.S. Senate, had been approved in the constitutional process here in Hawaii. So these were binding agreements between these two countries. So as we went through that history and that presence of mind that as an independent nation, our sovereignty, our independence would be recognized by what we call all civilized countries of the world, those people who recognize international law. And part of the body of international law is not only the customary laws, but those specific treaties and executive agreements that are made. And so in 1893, 50 years after the British came in, then the United States, in an even more aggressive act, landed in Hawaii, and through that aggression violated the sovereign integrity of this independent nation. But believing that the United States' character was equal to, or perhaps even higher than, the British character, the expectation was that the events undertaken by U.S. Minister Stevens, the minister plenipotentiary from the United States to Hawaii, was not going to be supported by the President of the United States, just as similarly as the actions of this British captain who overthrew the Hawaiian nation was not supported by the administration in Great Britain. But we came in for a surprise because the administration of Benjamin Harrison was all in favor of this kind of overthrow of an independent nation. His administration was not successful in grabbing Hawaii because Harrison's administration got out of office in March of 1893. These events occurred in Hawaii in January 1893. In March of 1893, a new president was sworn in, and actually some people would say, well, actually he was an older president, having served 4 years prior to the Harrison administration, Benjamin Harrison, and that was Grover Cleveland. So Cleveland comes back in as president, is sworn in not in January, as is usually the case in the United States presently, but they were being sworn in March. And so you had a change of administration even later. And when the Hawaiian people went to the United States and asked for the restoration of the kingdom, while President Cleveland attempted to do it for a period of time, there were interferences. The United States Congress was finally appealed to, or Cleveland finally, well, there's some steps that perhaps I should go through more methodically. What Cleveland did was send an investigator into Hawaii, and his name is James Blount. Yes, it's B-L-O-U-N-T. So if you're looking for a report within the congressional records, you can look for the Blount report, B-L-O-U-N-T. And Mr. Blount had been the the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, and then retired, and then was appointed by Cleveland to do the investigation. So he was not a neophyte in the question of international relations. He did his investigation, reported to Grover Cleveland, and in that report raised international principles and showed the not only the manipulations but the collusion between a handful of people, including and led by, on the American side, or the American governmental side, Minister Stevens, and on the other side by what had been called in Hawaii the missionary boys, including Sanford Dole, including Lauren Thurston, and a number of others. And so they laid out exactly what had happened in Hawaii. So there's very little additional significant events that needs to be considered in understanding this story. It's well contained in the Blunt Report and then recited in President Cleveland's address to both houses of Congress on December 18, 1893. Before reporting to Congress, Cleveland then sent an emissary to Hawaii and addressed those people who called themselves a provisional government led by Sanford Dole. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing now, "As your president, I direct you American citizens to restore the life of the land back to Queen Lili'u o Kalani." These folks who now claim that they were leaders in the provisional government responded by saying that Cleveland had no authority over them because they were Hawaiian citizens, not American citizens. In a previous time, about just a few months before, when these same individuals approached Minister Stevens saying, "Now is the time to land the American troops," Stevens' response or question to them was, "Under what guise do I land these American troops? Because I am already under orders to obey international law, so I cannot simply land the American troops to declare that I'm overthrowing the nation." So they responded, that's the Sanford Dole, Lawrence Thurston group of folks, "You land the American troops under the guise of protecting American lives and property." Who are the Americans whose lives were being threatened? The lives of Sanford Dole, Lawrence Thurston, and these other groups. So on one hand, they claim to be Americans and thus to avail themselves of the rights as American citizens. A few months later, after having overthrown the nation through the assistance of the U.S. military, under the administration of Benjamin Harrison, the new president of the United States steps in and says, "You Americans, I direct you to restore the life of the land to Lili'u o Kalani." Their response is, "Well, you have no right, no jurisdiction. We are not American citizens. We are Hawaiians." And so you can see some of the dirty dealings that occurred in the step-by-step process to deny the native Hawaiians the essential right to their own government. Those are some of the steps Cleveland eventually submitted to the United States, to the discretion of the United States Congress, as I said, in December of 1893, December 18, 1893. And his address is part of the public record, in which he says that it is not the character of the United States simply to go overseas and take over these weaker countries. And then he says something very important with regards to international law. He says that while international law does not have an effective enforcement mechanism, the principle of law should not be dependent on its enforceability, but as a matter of character, as a matter of honor, it requires an even greater obligation that we follow the law because it is the right thing to do and not because of its enforceability. So in essence, although a country may be able to get away with stealing the sovereign rights of another country, the most forceful enforcement should be its honor and character not to commit those actions. And therefore, he says, it is upon our honor that we do what is appropriate, that we do what is right. During that period of time, during the second Cleveland administration, the internal conditions of the United States was even worse than what you see it is today. The economy had crashed. The split between the Democrats and the Republicans was even greater, and so Cleveland had other forces to contend with, not only the international incident that occurred here in Hawaii. There's a book, and it's called The Hawaiian Incident, and right now I forget who the author is. He had been a member of the U.S. Congress, and I believe he was a senator, and he wrote of this incident. So you might want to get that book, and it'll give you a different viewpoint from inside the U.S. Congress on what was occurring here in Hawaii and in the United States. So that gives you some of that background information about what had been occurring in that period of time. Well, the result became such that Cleveland was unable to move. Some people would even go so far as to say, not only politically, but physically, he was very limited. His Secretary of State had passed away. The person who he had been so closely associated with and who he depended to deal with these foreign affairs had passed away. Cleveland then contracted cancer of the jaw. So he had his whole bottom of his, well, I guess the jaw is just a bottom bone. He had his jaw removed, and it had to be replaced. I'm not sure how they reconstructed it, but he suffered from these physical ailments. And yet, if you really understand Cleveland's character, he was of such a strong character. There's other interesting stories about him as a man of honor, as a man of character. He claimed, and some people would actually degrade him for his statement that he was the father of a child from a woman who was not his wife, and that is true. He did make that claim. The story goes that there was a woman who was impregnated, and she was not a married woman, and it may have been from one of the college boys that Cleveland had gone to college with. Now, all of the boys denied responsibility, denied fatherhood for this child, and there was no proof among anyone who really was a father. So Cleveland stepped up and says, I will make the claim. And in that way, stood in and said, and I will act as and undertake the responsibilities of fatherhood for this child. Some people point at Cleveland as having engaged in extramarital or premarital sex. Other people see him as a man of character. To whether or not he was or was not the real father, he at least had the honor of stepping up and claiming responsibility to take charge of this child as a child's father. So I guess you can see, like many other things, different sides of this argument and different sides of this personality. But the whole story of Grover Cleveland and his life and his relationship with Hawaii is very interesting. One of the reasons why Liliuokalani was even more dedicated to not taking up arms against the provisional government was because of her knowledge that Cleveland was to be the president of the United States after Harrison. Remember, all of these events occurred in January 1893, the landing of the American troops on, when was that, the 15th or the 16th of January? I think it was on the 15th of January. Her protest, the so-called overthrow on the 17th of January, the 18th of January, a ship sailing to the United States, etc., etc. But she had already known that the election having taken place in, when was that, November of the year prior to it, and that Cleveland was elected, but he did not take office until March. And today they have moved up the inauguration to January rather than March. So at that time, knowing that Cleveland was going to be the president, and having seen Cleveland as president back in prior to Benjamin Harrison 4 years before that, and having worked with Cleveland as the president of the United States and being at least familiar with him while she had not yet been queen, but during that period of time in which she was active in the politics of Hawaii, she had expected that there would be a fairer treatment by Cleveland, and of course to be able to predict that the internal affairs would be such that it would sap Cleveland's energy to continue to operate with Hawaii in a more honorable way. It was a judgment call made by Queen Liliuokalani. And I cannot say at this point that the call was wrong, given the facts that she had available to her. I thought she had the bet had been a reasonable bet, and for her desire not to waste anyone's blood over this issue, if we can resolve it in this other way, I think was an appropriate determination. Okay, so that's my background of Hawaii's history. I hope you find it at least somehow educational or informative. If you have any questions, you can give me a call. Why don't you call after the 7 o'clock hour, after the news, and we will have more time to discuss these matters. The telephone number, you might want to write it down now, is 524-1080.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii, Kupa ama hope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Pala pala anunu me ka pata. Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, Koku ana honoa o Pilani, Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano, Pa'aku me ke oni o ka kuhi hewa. Aolea e kau I ka pulima, Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi, Po'ohui ai nā ku ai hewa, I ka pono sivila a o ke kanā.